Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Hello and welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber Larkins, your host, and today I have a guest with me, Mr. John Jarman. He is a Marine Corps veteran. He currently holds a master's in science and physical education. He's a coach, worked with athletes, now currently working with, is it a golf?
It's a private golf club.
Okay, I was wanting to call it a golf retreat for some reason. But,
a lot of people think it is because it's pretty beautiful. So
yeah,
I run the fitness center here. So
yeah. So the most impressive thing is you have this book, Broken and Redeemed, and we are excited to have you here. Have you expound upon kind of what you've been through and your experience here, and then how you come to write this book and how you're helping people through it. So welcome, John. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
So why don't you, I know I kind of gave a little bit of a background there, but why don't you share with us who you are, what you do?
Well, I mean, the premise behind the book, I guess, is the trauma that I went through as a young man. So, I don't have a lot of memory up until age 12 because my dad was an abusive alcoholic, and there was a lot of trauma and violence in there. And when I started working with Christina, when I moved back home, we feel that through our work, we feel that I was probably part of that as a victim as well. Not only my mom, and I've blacked it out, probably a good thing that I don't remember. And so, that's how I grew up. I didn't grow up in church, and, my dad left when I was 12. It was my mom and my three brothers left to fend for ourselves, basically. And, I had an estranged relationship with my dad until I came back from Okinawa in that would have been 1988, 89. And I confronted him with a lot of this stuff, and we mended our relationship. And so we did have a positive relationship later in life.
So I think sometimes the brain, to protect us, it shuts down some of those memories. Have you been able to tap back into some of those memories now?
No. And there was a few years when I first started working with Christina that I really wanted to know. And then, I kind of just stopped. I did a lot of research and looking back into, because I lived in Arkansas at the time when I had some trauma to my left arm. I was 8 months old and I was in the hospital for two major surgeries. And so I wanted to know a little bit more about those. And I researched the hospitals that were in existence and no record of me in the hospital. One of the hospital, their warehouse where they stored their microfilm, which my records would have been on, that had caught on fire and they lost half their records. So the records could have been there. But there's no record of me. I wasn't able to find anything to look back and see what caused the trauma to my arm. And so, and then working with Christina, we had, being of faith, you understand there's the demonic side of faith, and there's the, and so we had a situation one time when we were doing some recovery where we had some not so friendly spiritual encounters. And so I decided that, it's not worth it. And if God wants to reveal it to me, he'll reveal it. And I just look at it. It's the protective mechanism. Christina said, if I found out, I'd probably have to spend 10 more years in counseling to get over it. So,
So can you expound upon a little bit about who Christina is, just for our listeners?
Yeah. Christina Holland is my counselor that I found. I moved back home to the Pacific Northwest in 2005. And in 2007, I switched careers, and, I kind of saw my self-destructive behavior start to happen again. And so I didn't want to do that. And I sought out counseling. And by the grace of God, she was the third office I called that day off my Google search, and she was accepting new patients. And we worked together off and on for 10 years. And without her work and Scotty Kessler, who's my spiritual mentor, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. The book wouldn't exist without the two of them.
Everything you think kind of rooted back from those early childhood years. And how
Yeah.
has that affected your life, like throughout your life? How has
Well,
that kind of affected you?
well, it had a pretty much negative effect, I'll say on my life before, my faith and where I am today in my faith walk, because, I was very selfish. I was very egotistical, pride, and, I did a lot of things, and, it was what John wanted, and I was going to get it no matter what, and step on people along the way. And so looking back where I'm at now, I hurt a lot of people. There was a lot of bitterness in me. There was a lot of shame, resentment, that type of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and so I dealt with that, and not knowing really why I was behaving that way. And that doesn't condone my behavior in any stretch of the way, but it did affect my relationships and work and my marriage
Mm-hmm.
and all that stuff. And now that I've been through the counseling that I've been through and the spiritual mentoring and knowing where I'm at in faith, I see, how the effects of that trauma, affected my life for years. And so, the people that I've heard, some of them I've sought out for forgiveness, and, some have heard these things, and, it's an ongoing process. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's part of, your walk with Christ, is you have to look back at your past to get to the future. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at what point did you give your heart to God?
it was on a level. It was a kind of a continuum. So I started as I started getting in coaching, I started getting involved with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So my faith started to grow, but it didn't really blossom until my work with Scotty. And then in 2016 is when I truly gave up control, because my business was struggling. I had a small training studio that was mine, and we were struggling. My brother, his wife was really sick. I'd already lost two of my brothers, and so I was just, it was a rough time in my life. And then one morning I just woke up and I said, I'm done. I can't do this without you. I'm giving you all control, and you tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it, kind of thing. And,
Mm-hmm.
and it was probably 2 hours that morning that I prayed and read scripture. And one of the scriptures I, read that morning is 1 John 5, 1, 5 through 10, and talks about Jesus is the light. And if we claim to have fellowship with him, but continue to walk in darkness, then we don't have the truth. The truth is not in us. And when I read that, I said, I need to change my life, because that's what I was doing. I was professing faith in Christ, but I was still walking in the darkness, some of the darkness of my past. And that was really the eye opener. And so then I started the self examination to look at what darkness I was holding on to get rid of that. And that took a little bit of time, but it's gone. And, I'm not going to say I don't sin, because my temper still flares. Some of my old self still shows up, but I know when it's coming, and I can stop it sometimes. And so, I tell people, as Christians, as we grow in faith, we sin less. We still sin, but we sin less. And because we have that fault.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really when it happened, is that morning, because that epiphany of going, okay, you're professing this, but you're still holding on to some of the darkness of your past. And I had to
Mm-hmm.
let that go.
Yeah, you said a lot there. I definitely think that as we move throughout this journey called life, we'll get caught up doing things and we're like, what's the why behind really what we're doing? Um,
Right.
but but then it comes to a point, and I think it's a beautiful place that you get to where you just say, I am professing one thing, I'm doing something else, and how can I change that? I think as humans, we innately want to be authentic, and we want to be what we say we are, but it's easy to get caught up in this thing of not being who we are. So it's great when you get to a place of awareness. I want you to talk a little bit about, like, from our listeners' perspective, if there's people out there that are kind of doing this thing, how do you help them capture this kind of awareness, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I would say to that is find somebody who's further along in their spirituality than you are, and have them disciple you, and be a mentor to you, because that's really what took place and helped. that and helped me get to where I'm at. And if you are a survivor of trauma, don't be so shamed of what took place where you won't ask for help. And I think that's a problem with some survivors, is because they're so shameful of what took place. They're afraid to tell anybody about it, and that's why you got to find that counselor or friend or somebody that you can just be unconditionally honest with, and work through that. And that would be the biggest thing. And then it's going to be painful. It's the messy side of Christianity is what I call it, because it's a self-examination. And you have to be humble and you have to be vulnerable to go through that. So, and for men, it's tougher, I think, because we have such pride. In my men's group the other day, we were talking about what is, your job. Does that identify you? What identifies you? And I'm like, well, right now, I don't worry about identity, because I know who my identity's in, and it's Christ. So I don't, yes, I have a job, but it doesn't define me, and so we were talking about that. And I think we get caught up in, too much of that is, we have to have this or we have to have that in order to feel good about ourselves. And that's not going to, you can have all that, but you're still going to have that emptiness if you don't have that relationship with Christ.
Yeah, and I've had other guests on that have spoke about this thing with men, and obviously I'm not a man, so I can't relate to that. But I can understand how societal pressures get on men to exude this strength and leadership. So sometimes it's hard to do that, and I think it's great when men like yourself will step up and say, this is okay, because to stuff things in a box and put it away it's not healthy. It's going to eventually manifest in your body in some way, shape, or form. Tell me a little bit about, from a man's perspective, you work with people and you coach them, but do you find trauma, do they open up to you with
It takes a little time. It takes a little time. I mean, it's a little easier because I'm super vulnerable about what I went through, and so it kind of opens that door for them, But they still have to feel that trust, and that what's said, kind of what's said in the meeting stays in the meeting, which always does. But it's when you first start working with somebody, you got to build that trust, and part of that is just being open and honest with them and earning their respect. But the even for me, because I controlled so much of my life from age 12 until I gave up control, that was my biggest thing, is I controlled everything, and I didn't want to give that up, because I thought if I did, I wouldn't be able to do certain things, or I wouldn't get things done the way I wanted them. And that was just a lie. And, it's amazing, because I get more done now, and it's even better.
Right. Right. Definitely. This is the thing that I've been dealing with looking at trauma, not only my own in my own personal life, but then trauma as I interview people on the podcast, as I work with my clients. And I hear more and more of trauma. There is a shame a lot of times that surround different traumas are different, but there is a shame. That's a big part why I'm doing the podcast. I feel like if we can start sharing and talking about things, it allows people to know there shouldn't be shame. It's funny because you and I feel like are very similar, because I was working with athletes and entrepreneurs doing photography, and I would hear these stories. And I wasn't a counselor or anything. I just would hear these stories, and I'm like, these are so powerful. People need to hear these things.
Right.
But it's funny because people are very open to share, sometimes one-on-one, but when they feel like they have to put themselves out there, that's a really scary thing. And I don't know how to help people understand that it's not a bad thing. We all struggle with those types of shame and guilt, and those characteristics at some point.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's important to start one-on-one, because they have to build that. They have to get rid of that shame by sharing. That it's still hard for me to wrap my mind around how somebody who's a survivor of trauma or victim of trauma can feel that they were the cause of that act, but that's where the mind goes, is that they did something that caused the act to happen to them. And that's the that's one of the big hurdles to get over in this, and it's tough. It's probably a little easier for me because I don't know what happened. I just know it happened, and so it's but that's a big hurdle, is that shame part of it, and the guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, not guilt, but shame, and the bitterness. And so, and
Yeah.
I saw it in my mom throughout her whole life, because it was tough for her to forgive, and the forgiveness aspect releases a lot of that. And I tell people all the time, forgiving the person who committed the trauma doesn't excuse them from the act. What it does is it frees you from the captivity of it,
Mm-hmm.
because you're letting it go. And that's the easiest way I can explain it. When you can come to that, and it doesn't happen overnight, but when you can come to that, then that's when that pressure releases out of you, and you can actually breathe and go, wow, I'm over this. So
Yeah. And it's never cut and dry. Like it seems like trauma is never, it seems like when you think of trauma, you think like, oh, it's in a perfect world. You think like this traumatic thing happened and now I'm going to talk about it or choose not to talk about it. But it's never really cut and dry. There's so many emotions that go into that,
right.
especially in childhood trauma. So now you're dealing with not only what has happened to you, but now how do I share that in a way that is not going to throw people under the bus, people that I still love, even though maybe they've hurt me. And it's a, it's a journey
It is
of,
tough, and that's trauma's a lot like grief when you lose a loved one, because people grieve differently, people
mm-hmm,
experience trauma differently, and they handle it differently, and it's case by case. So
mm-hmm,
you're spot on in saying that, and it's that's why you got to have help. You can't do it by yourself, and people that think they can do
mm-hmm,
it by themselves, I mean, I hate to say it, but they're not going to do it. You got to have somebody that can help you and walk through it with you, because it's not going to be something you can do on your own. And that's the biggest thing, is the help. And that's why it's tough for men, because they don't want to ask for help, because they think they can do it, because, oh, I'm strong. I know I can handle this. Well, guess what? You can't. So
yeah. Well, there's societal pressure, I feel like that is put on men from even when they're young boys, that says you have to
mhm.
be, you're the man of the house, or you're the, you're whatever. And we put these things, and it's, while I think there's a place and a time for that, and that's healthy, but there's also a time and a place to say, hey, we are emotional beings, and it's okay
Yeah.
to have emotions, and it's okay to express those emotions. Because when we
Yes,
don't
ma'am.
express them, that's when we get in trouble.
Well, and I mean, we're coming to the end of Mental Health Awareness Month. May is Mental Health Awareness Month in the United States, and we're trying to take the stigmatism out of mental health, because there's people that think that going to a counselor labels them as crazy. Well,
Mm.
that doesn't label you as crazy. It's just, you're going to get healthy. It's like going to a doctor when you broke your arm. You wouldn't walk around with a broken arm and not go to the doctor. So the stigma there has got to, somehow we have to break that stigma, and let people know that it's okay. I struggled with that with my brother Steve, my oldest brother. I tried to get him into counseling numerous times, and he's like, John, I don't want to go because people will think I'm crazy. And I just looked at him and said, Steve, you are crazy. We're all a little crazy, so just go.
Yeah.
It's a safe zone. That's what I love about the counseling. It's a safe place that the counselor is not going to judge you, condemn you, nothing. They're going to listen to you, and then they're going to shed a little different light on it, because you don't see things. They see it from a different perspective, and then they give you tools that you can start working through and dealing with them. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, there was numerous times in the 10 years I worked with Christina, I'd like, how come you didn't tell me this last year? And she goes, you weren't ready, you know? And so
Yeah.
there's a plan. They develop a plan, and part of her plan was for me to write this book, because she told me in 2014 to write the book. And I started writing it then, but I got 5 chapters in, and I just didn't know where to take the book. And so I just set it on a shelf till February of 2021. And then I picked it up again, and I finished the book in 4 weeks, because I was at a different place in my faith walk where I could finish the book. But I think one of her objectives of me writing the book was it was healing, because after, when you write that stuff down on paper and you can go back and read it, there's a healing process to that. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I thank her for suggesting this, and it's just been a blessing since.
I have actually seen that in, when I first had this vision for these transformation through trauma sessions that I was photographing.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to give people a place to share their stories. I had no idea the
Right.
impact it was going to have on my client who now had a release. And I can't tell you how many people that I would do these sessions for, and they were like, this is a sense of release. Like I was able to let go. And it's
Yep.
funny, even here on the podcast, I've sat with people after we finished recording and they're like, it just felt so good to be able to release that story. And there's something powerful in that, being able to get that off your plate, off your shoulders,
Yep.
and get it out. Anything, even the Bible talks about this with darkness, hiding things in darkness. Like it has control over us as long as
Yep.
we're hiding it. But the moment we
Yep.
let it go, then it no longer can control us any longer.
Correct.
Do you counsel or do you just coach?
Well, I do personal training here at the club, but and what I do, it's more of a discipleship. So I run men's disciples, and so I mentor young men and people who want to grow in faith. And I follow the same program Scotty put me on, he was generous enough to let me put it in the book. It's called the Big 10, and it's 10 steps to where you can discipleships or disciple somebody who is either brand new to Christ or is a few years into their faith walk, and it just helps them deepen their faith. And that's really what I do is I work in that avenue. I don't do any mental health counseling or anything like that. If I have somebody that does that, I'm going to refer them to a professional. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about your book. What
go
do
ahead.
people find when they embark on the book? Who would this be for?
It's funny you ask, because when I gave it to my editor the very first day, she goes, "Who's your target audience?" And I said, "Anyone," because I really didn't specifically think about an audience when I was writing. And she said, "John, you can't do that. You have to have a target audience." And so she did the review of the manuscript, and she wrote me back. And one of the sentences said, "Okay, John, I usually don't say this, but your book's for everyone." And so, the book really is for anybody. I think it's geared a little bit more towards men just because I wrote it. However, my female friends that have read the book, they've loved the book. What they find in the book is each chapter, at the end of chapters, I have reflection questions. You don't have to do them at the end of every chapter. You can read the book and come back, but I would encourage you, if you do read the book, to go back and answer the questions or answer them at some point, because I think uh, they'll help you discover things about you, and they'll help deepen your faith. And so it's not a how-to book. It's a what I did book, and it's a book of hope, because it lets people know that there is hope, and that no matter where you've been in your walk or what you've done in your life, if you come to Christ and give up control, you're going to be free, and you're going to get redeemed from all that. And um, it was super, and I walked through a lot, and there's a few hard chapters in there because I'm brutally honest with some of the things, and so the hardest part of the book was writing about some of the transgressions that I did without opening wounds of other people, and that was the tough part of the book. One of my favorite parts of the book is the last chapter. Is called "Dear Younger Me," and it's a Mercy Me song that they released in 2015, and it really spoke to me when I heard the song. So I wanted to know what made Bart write the song, and so it was a blessing that I got to meet him in 2015 when they came to town. And we sat backstage and shared testimony. And if you've seen the movie I Can Only Imagine, then his childhood and my childhood are a lot alike. And I said, "Well, what inspired you to write this song?" And he said, "Well, my counselor told me to write the song to my son as if I was writing it to my younger self." And I said, "Well, that's good. My counselor wants me to write a book, and I'd like to use your song in my book. Can I have your permission?" He said, "Yes." And he said, "Just one request." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "I'd like a copy of the book when it's done." I said, "You got it." So I've sent the book off to him. I haven't heard from him about it, but that's one of my favorite parts of the book. And one of the very last thing in the book is I asked the reader to write a letter to their younger self, because when you write that letter, there's things that you did in your past that you would change, but there's some things that you wouldn't, because some of those things made you who you are today. And so you've got to figure out, what would you tell your younger self to change and not to change, or what advice would you give that person? And I put my letter in the book. And so my letter to my younger self is in the book, and that was a fun part of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never heard of that before, but that's very interesting. to
Hmm.
to do that. And I love material. I love to read. I love to listen to Audible actually. But
Yeah,
I
my book's not there yet. It's going to be when my publisher told me I had to sell a few more copies before they do the Audible. So
yeah. But nonetheless, I love material where you're reading, you listen to it, and then there's like applicable can't even say that, um, where you can apply the steps
yeah.
to to actually change, make
Hmm.
transformation.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times, you know, people will talk great about you need to make a change, you need to do this, you need to do that. But sometimes, and I've been in these shoes where it's like, I don't know how to make those changes.
Right.
So I feel like when you have a book that shares, like, okay, now go through and do these activities, it
Hmm.
it brings a lot more clarity in. Would you say that this is more for like Christians or people who are looking to just increase their faith in general?
Well, I would say, I mean, obviously it's geared more towards a faith-based audience, but people who aren't Christians, they're going to find something because, there's a lot of mental health aspects to the book as well. But it's somebody who's searching for that answer,
Mm-hmm.
looking for how can I heal from whatever happened to me. And I think it would be, I mean, I had a friend who told me we played high school football together and he heard about the book and he said, well, John, he goes, I guess I would define myself as agnostic. And so, but he read the book and he said he enjoyed the book. Not sure if it changed his belief, but he wrote, he said it was a phenomenal book. He goes, I can't believe you wrote it. And so, I think the book truly is for anybody. It's just, this Holy Spirit prompted me to put my story on paper, and it's to help people, and I hope it is. And it helped one lady. She was about to commit suicide, and she read the book and direct messaged me through Facebook and said the book saved her life. And so I was reading her direct message in tears because that's a powerful statement. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's very powerful. I
yeah.
often
And
say,
she was a former I don't mean to cut you off, but she was a
yeah,
former
no.
believer, and I check in with her periodically because she was about 3 years behind me in high school, so we don't really didn't know each other. But for the last 8 months, she's been on a prayer and reading plan, and she's back in church, and so it saved her life, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, it's such a beautiful thing because as Christians, we are we are called to fellowship. We're called to build that communal place. We're not called to be alone. And I
correct.
think that when we see that even if our story is impacting only one, it's serving a purpose. Like that is our
Yes.
purpose. And you never know the ripple effect. You never know what
Yeah.
that person is going to go share and do in their life that's going to
Right.
make impact however many
Right.
people's
Yeah.
lives.
And
So,
I asked my publisher to send me a list of where the book has been sold, and I've sold 2 books in Poland, 2 books in Germany, and one in the United Kingdom. So it's the book's out there worldwide, and it's going to be interesting to see the impact I have there. I won't even know some of the impact that the book has on people's lives. So
not probably not on this side of heaven,
yep.
but maybe one day you'll
Yep.
know that. But it's such a beautiful thing. It's like, you know what? It's such a picture of just obedience. Like let me just do what God is calling me to do and putting on my heart to do,
Yeah,
and let Him deal with the consequences of.
and I'll expand on that, Amber, because when I obeyed in February of 2021 to write the book, by September of that year, I was signed by Morgan James Publishing, and by March of the following year, I had the book in my hand. And so, for it to take place that quickly, you know, it was because of my obedience. I never would
Mhm.
have imagined that I would have had a book a year later in my hand, let alone be on Kindle in April of last year. So it's been out.
Yeah,
It's been out on Kindle for a year. It'll be in bookstores for a year this August. So I'm coming on the year anniversary of the official launch, and it's just been an amazing ride.
that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
so awesome. Um, Well, I am excited. I know you sent me the book. I
Hmm.
had not had a chance to. I have such a hard time sitting down to actually read. That's why I like Audible. but um but I do, and now even speaking to you about it makes me really want to go back and make the time to sit down and read it.
Well,
Um
when you finish, please write a review for me. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share, or anything else that we didn't cover here that you want to
you know,
expound upon?
I think we covered everything, and I'll ask you the same question. Make sure because it's your show. I want to make sure that we covered what you'd like. But the biggest thing I'd like to leave with your audience is, especially your males, is don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't lay down your pride, and go seek help because it'll be the best thing you ever did. Whether it's Christian based or just a mental health counselor, just take away the pride, raise your hand, get the help. And then the last thing I'll let your listeners know, if they want a signed copy of the book, if they go to my website and they use the Bible verse Titus 3:3-7, they'll get a discount on the book. I'll sign the book and ship it out to them, or they can go anywhere books are sold to buy the book. So,
Hmm. And we'll be sure to put all that in the show notes as well, so people have a place to actually a link to follow and
yep.
get that. Because I know your heart is really getting the message out there, and so we definitely want to get the message out there as much as possible. I'll just say this, like in closing thoughts. I had this. I was on a podcast yesterday, and it's funny because I'm thinking about it again today. But this whole idea of, you know, when you're on an airplane, how they say that you have to put the mask on your face and like
Hmm.
save yourself first before you can help anyone else. And
Right.
it's such a perfect analogy for anything in life, really. And I just, the more that I kind of reflect on the relationship of, just man and woman and marriage and, all these things. And I think this is a lot of the reason why men have this pressure, because they wear a lot of weight on their shoulders, as
Yep.
far as like, I'm the supporter, the provider, I'm the leader of the family, I'm the one that this kind of all falls back on. But what you just said is so true. Like, you have to protect yourself before you can truly be that leader that you're called to be, that
Yeah.
husband that you're called to be.
I like to tell the people I work with and people I talk to is you have to love yourself before you can love somebody else. And growing up, I didn't. There was times I didn't like the person I saw in the mirror, and now I love the guy. And because I have a different heart, I have a different vision, and it took a long time to get there. And you do truly have to love yourself before you can love and help others. So,
Yeah, amen to that. That's so true. And it's biblical, It's like, how many times did we see Christ go alone? He had to be alone with
hmm.
God,
Yep.
before he could come serve the people.
Yes.
So it's it's definitely something that I think people need to be reminded of. And again, I'm not a man, so I can't speak into what that feels like, but I do understand, and I can empathize with the fact that sometimes there's a pressure there. And
Yep.
let's bond together and help people and help ourselves, help other people, and make the world a better place.
Yeah, and we really need that right now in today's world because there's some crazy stuff happening.
And it's happening
So,
so that our world is changing so quickly, so
yep.
rapidly.
Yep.
And I just think as technology increases, we're going to see more and more of a shift. And, you
Yeah, and
know,
I think I think technology is creating a division in our society because we don't have to communicate like we used to in person and stuff. And I mean, even though we're on camera here and we can see each other, it's still not like us sitting in the same room. There's a different connection if you and I were in the same room talking about this, Amber. Because I did a podcast, I've done it some where I've gone to the studio and it's just a different feel because you're in that room together. So
mm-hmm,
it's that connection you have when you're sitting next to somebody or looking in someone as you talk, and that personal
mm-hmm.
connection we're losing, and I think we need to get it back.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see more and more people wanting that authentic connection with other humans, and why
Yeah.
it's so important that we continue to go out of our way to create those places where we can show up in person, because it is a different energy. It's a whole different energy.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very great conversation. I'm so happy to have you here and have you sharing, and just thank you for everything that you're doing and your heart behind the book. That means a lot, not only to me, but I know to so many. So
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.